We're looking forward to a fascinating evening hearing about what people think about faith. We're Saracen and Partners, and we're one of the leading charity investment managers in the UK. That we look after a number of Roman Catholic congregations and orders, and indeed the Tablet is one of our clients. We are deeply involved with the Catholic Church, and we're delighted and honoured to be here this evening.
I'm not Peter Stanford, although we do have the same barber. Thank you very, very much indeed for being with us tonight on this Ascension Day. We've been engaging in a lively conversation about the Church and the world since 1840. So what we're doing tonight is simply doing that kind of conversation in a slightly different way.
We are here to talk about faith. On this side, Sarah Dunant, Sacred Hearts, one of her novels from Renaissance Italy. You'll also know Sarah from her Radio 4 series, When the Greeks Flew Kites. On my other side, Christopher Jamison, Abbot Christopher Jamison, Abbot of Worth, but also an outstanding writer, an outstanding broadcaster. The starting point for this, really, for those of you who've seen the advertisement, is this book that I've put together called What We Talk About When We Talk About Faith, which is really a collection of conversations that I've had over the last 35 years. And the collection of interviews in here are interviews done, as I say, over 35 years, initially at the Tablet and then at the Catholic Herald when I was there as editor for a while, and then more recently with the first with the Guardian, then the Independent, and now with the Daily Telegraph. But I suppose the other thing that came out of those conversations with all the different people who are in the book is that sort of slight reluctance people have around talking about faith publicly now. And I suppose that is really what we want to talk about this evening. That idea that there is somehow a divide between the public and the private. And I suppose it's typified by an expression from 2003 when Alistair Campbell was Tony Blair's press spokesman, and some journalists asked if Tony Blair would say something about his faith, and he was attending Catholic masses then, as we know. There's an interview with Sri Blair in the book, and Alistair Campbell said, "Oh no, we don't do God." And so there was this idea that the two things are separate, but it's still an issue now. Theresa May, I was sitting at a dinner recently next to her faith advisor. Yes, she has a faith advisor in 10 Downing Street, and I said, "How marvellous. I like interviewing people about faith." She likes being photographed coming out of church on a Sunday. She talks about her vicar father. She talks about faith. It would be lovely to know where exactly she links that faith together with some of her policies, possibly. I didn't say that, obviously. I'm a very nice person. I said it very kindly, in a really warm and welcoming way. And he said, "Oh, she thinks it's a private matter." Is it a private matter that our Prime Minister says she has a faith? I don't know. So that's the broad remit. That's talking about faith. That's what we're going to do. Starting, Christopher, do you think that there's a taboo around talking about faith in public nowadays?
Yeah, I genuinely think there is, in that the assumption now is a secular assumption. And it's quite difficult to get across, I think, to an older generation of people just how profound this shift is. That when many older people were growing up, the assumption was faith, usually Christian faith, but also Jewish faith. And now the assumption is definitely not. The regular assumption is that people don't have faith. And so people who have faith are now the odd ones out. And that can be really hard. And I first came across this working with young people. I've been really blessed to work all my life with young people. And trying to explain to older parents or grandparents that, they could send them to every Catholic school on the planet, and it wasn't going to change the fact that the assumption around them was secular, and that they would, in their own turn, make their own choice, no matter what the family and the school were saying. And I think that is a major, major shift, which the Church is very slow to understand its implications.
And Sarah, would you agree that in public discourse, in the public square was the phrase Pope Benedict used when he was at Westminster Hall, that faith is sort of outside of that. It is treated as a private matter now.
I suppose it depends whether or not you're talking about our own society here or looking at it from a broader context in the world. I mean, clearly there has been a secularization of government and countries throughout Europe, certainly. And yet, ironically, at exactly that moment, and I suppose you could typify that by saying, now when the Archbishop of Canterbury speaks, although it is the Church of England, nobody will listen to him, usually because he's criticising the government, right? So the split is very powerful there. But when you look at the rest of the world, we've actually seen a huge resurgence of religion. Now, maybe at some point we have to talk about what the relationship between faith and religion is. So I'm thinking, of course, about Islam, where faith has become politics, and quite painful politics, and also America, interestingly, where, and probably we were naive about this given America's history, where America has resurged as a very right-wing version of faith, which has influenced politics. And I think for Europe, which has had a quieter, longer secular journey, those two things have been quite frightening. And the area where faith, particularly I think the Catholic faith and deep Christian faith, comes into combat with the secular is areas over forms of liberal social justice. And those have become, I think, the very difficult areas for us to have both private and public conversations about. It's a real shame because our society as it stands is deeply soaked in Christian and Judaic traditions. Our moral structures come from them, and yet we have reached places where that conversation is almost always acrimonious, and that is a problem.
Identifying one of the things I loved in the book, I was sent by the Telegraph to interview Fern Britton, and she'd had a tattoo done in Jerusalem, and she was telling me that from 500 onwards, if you went to Jerusalem, you'd have a little cross on your wrist. It's been going on for 1500, and that's how you identified yourself to other Catholics in a way, and that allowed you to have those conversations. But Sarah, your own Catholicism, you were brought up Catholic.
Yes. Yes.
That was another of those questions
Yeah,
that sounded
right,
like
no,
a statement.
no. Well, it puts me in a slightly difficult but interesting position here, because I was brought up Catholic, and it was very important to me, and I was deeply comforted by it, and it gave me deep understandings of a morality which I think I have carried on from. I collided with our liberal social democracy taking place, and I specifically collided with feminism. And feminism had an enormous impact on me, and it really knocked me off my Catholic perch. And so I'm very, very interested now in the places where, although I understand the power and importance of faith, I find when, exactly the thing I just said, when the conversations come to areas like that, there is always a slight problem.
Thank you all very, very much. We look forward to talking to you when we go. The tablet has its own sommelier, so when we're testing the wine or tasting the wine, we look forward to talking to you then.